We got there at 2 o'clock.
Just want to share that we have September. I can just say
We're
we're 17 now.
17 for 105,000. It was rough.
Math.
I feel like they just.
Did you get it?
Does.
Peter?
Not a great.
Twice. I didn't know how to send her.
If you think it's scary.
100% believe it's a scam.
All right. Good evening. I'd like to call the August 18th, 2026 work session to order. We'll do the roll call. Ms. Johnson.
Mr. Daniels.
Here.
Dr. Hubot.
Here.
Ms. Dobson. Here. Mr. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Holbrook. Mr. Carnes. Ms. Purvis. Here. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right. Motion by Dr. Hubot. Second. Second by Mr. Hill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Agenda is approved. All right. 2.01 discussions with demographic analyst advisors. Mr. Dupere, you wanna?
I'm gonna introduce Christopher Dick from DAA, and I'm gonna let him take it.
All right, that sounds great.
He's got an extensive.
That was a
It was a plus.
Segue.
Great segue.
We like to keep things efficient.
Yes.
All right, hello everyone. I think most of you know me at this point, but I'm Chris Dick, the president of Demographic Analytics Advisors. We'll just call it DAA from now on because it is a mouthful. Should have really thought about that when I created the company name. But so I'm here today to talk about the division-wide redistricting, focusing on today just the enrollment capacity and starting to talk about how we're going to get to some of the options. Today is not going to. I just want to preface this with. We're going to leave with some questions today. We're not going to leave with all the answers, but we are going to leave with kind of a baseline of understanding where we need to go next for our next meeting together, which will be on September 10th. Okay, so the agenda. We're going to focus first on the county, then the schools, then the options. That's really kind of the way we're running through it. So I'm going to start a little bit with demographics and housing. Who lives in Bedford County? How has that changed and the state of the housing stock? We're then going to move to mostly looking at historical enrollment before we look at the forecast. Then we're going to look at kind of how we do forecasts in a kind of development naive way, and then we're going to add development on top as well. And then finally, once we actually have that forecast with development incorporated, we're going to look at what it means for capacity and utilization, and then what our next steps look like. Okay, so a little bit about us just before we jump in. Again, I think most of you remember this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But Demographic Analytics Advisors, we're a demographic analysis firm specializing in school district enrollment forecasting, capacity and utilization analysis, and redistricting. We have kind of three primary demographers who work with the company. Myself, Dr. Ron Prevost, and Beth Jaros. Our backgrounds span kind of the U.S. Census Bureau's Pop Estimates program, Georgetown University, former state of Ohio demographer, as well as local transportation demography. A little bit about how we work. We use a lot of primary source data. I'm going to be talking about that today. Whether it's membership from you all, from the state, whether it's from the Census Bureau, whether it's county assessor and permit records, or development records, we go to the sources to get those data. We also, everything we do is fully reproducible, and we publish it, and our methods are as transparent as they can be. Some of this stuff is a little bit complicated, but we'll talk through it and make sure everyone understands kind of what we're talking about. Okay, a little bit of background to this study before we jump in. Again, all of you know this is about you, but just to kind of highlight the context. You all voted to consolidate Stewartsville, and that's obviously your oldest building, running near about 40% utilized. That was then postponed to 2027-28. That decision stands. This study really addresses the actions that follow from it. This division-wide study is here to inform that next set of choices. And some things we're going to talk about today is further consolidation warranted, and either way, yes or no. Also, how should boundaries be redrawn either way? Those are the things, those are a lot of the questions that I have for you all. There's really two pressures at once going on in the district. Enrollment has been declining over the last almost couple decades now. However, it's not declining evenly throughout the district. You're getting enrollment shifting east towards the Forest Corridor, while western and southern schools are really running well below capacity. We also have that projected 10% drop in state funding as of 27-28. So really our charge here is to be an independent read of enrollment capacity and having options grounded in the data by the end of the project. Okay. So with all that context, let's go ahead and start with demographics and housing. A little bit about Bedford County in brief. Again, you all live here, you probably know a lot of this, but I want to ground us. Your population is just north of 80,000 people, which is up almost 16% since 2010. You're a growing county, but like most of the United States, you're also an aging county. The under 18 population is just under 20% of the population of Bedford County. As a comparison for the state of Virginia overall, it's about 22%, so you're slightly older than the state as a whole. You're driven by home ownership, 84% home ownership, with relatively long tenure in Bedford, so low turnover and aging in place. I like to talk about one of the school districts I work with in the Midwest who was a growing district for 30 years. They are also a very low turnover, long tenure district. They built 15 schools in 10 years between 2000 and 2010. They're talking now about consolidating between 3 and 7 elementary schools. And a lot of it is, again, they're not decreasing in population. A lot of people bought homes. They either came in with young children or had young children in those homes. Those kids are now in college and they're not moving. So they had elementary schools that had 750 students in them. Now they have 350 to 400 students. And it just isn't economically viable for them to have all those schools anymore. A little bit more about Bedford, 81% single family housing, building really peaking towards the 90s, and still a lot of building going on. But some of those numbers, though a lot of that development is happening, is slower than it has been historically. And I want to kind of remind you of this when we start looking at future slides. Okay, so talking a little bit about that age structure. Bear with me because one of the favorite data visualizations of every single demographer is something called the population pyramid. What you're looking at here is on the left-hand darker blue side are males, on the right-hand lighter blue side are females. Starting at the bottom, we have 0 to 4-year-olds, 5 to 9-year-olds, 10 to 14, all the way up to 80, 84. And then the final one up there is all people 85 plus, so it's an open-ended category. When people started using this data visualization, a lot of countries in the world actually had population pyramids that looked like a pyramid. You had a lot of children, and then over time, that population decreased. And there were a couple of reasons for that. People had a lot of kids, infant mortality was higher, childhood mortality was higher, and young adult mortality was higher. As young adult mortality and infant mortality has decreased, we've also stopped having as many children. And so you get some different looking population. They're not really pyramids anymore. Population diamonds and all sorts of different shapes. But if we look at Bedford County in the year 2000, we notice a couple things. We have a relatively sizable under 15 population, or even under 19 population. So that's the population that you all are educating, right? Or are going to be educating soon for the 0 to 4. We also note that the majority of your population is in the working ages. This is when the baby boom was in those working ages, right? So you go to 2010, what happens? The baby boomers start aging. We still have a good number of children, especially in the 10 and above ages, so 10 to 19. But you'll notice that 0 to 4 population and 5 to 9 is starting to lag, the 10 to 14 and 10 to 19. Your population's aging, some of those people that were moving in, their kids are becoming teenagers through to 2020. And you see this even more, right? Now your largest population groups are 55 to 59 and 60 to 64. Also, your 15 to 19 is now larger than your 10 to 14, your 5 to 9, and your 0 to 4. So what this means is, again, if you go kind of back to 2000 and you keep growing, one thing that you'll notice, these are all on the same axes, right? So the population is growing. You can see that. It's also just fun to look at, right? I do these like animated GIFs sometimes, and that's kind of fun. But it is clearly, the population is clearly getting older. And if we look at the most recent data, before I show this, I do want to state, this is from a different, all three of these have been from the decennial census. There is officially no error in the decennial census. It is a full count of the population. The next one is going to be from the American Community Survey, which is a sample survey. And so there is error. So just keep that in mind. There's a couple weird things that I'll show. For instance, the 5 to 9 boys is just like pushed way out there. That's sampling error that's causing some of that. But what you'll see is in the most recent data for Bedford County, we're still seeing the same pattern that we saw in 2020, which is less children to older adults. Okay, and that leads to this, right? The school age share of the population is falling in Bedford. In 2000, the number was north of 17.5%. And again, I talked earlier about the 0 under 18 population. This is just the school age, so 5 to 17. That's why these numbers are different. So in 2000, that number was above 17.5%. Currently, it sits at about 15% of the population. And again, this isn't just Bedford. This is happening in a lot of places throughout the country. So how does Bedford County grow? We're talking about Bedford County as a growing county. The answer is migration, not natural increase. Births have been relatively stable in the county. They kind of dipped around 2020. They've rebounded a little bit since then. But in general, the number is kind of going down, but the population is going up. The reason the population is going up is because of migration. And you can kind of see that since 2019, that number has gone in some places up to over 1,000 per year. Okay, so we know a little bit about Bedford County. Now let's talk a little bit about Bedford County Public Schools. Bedford County Public Schools, the K-12 fall membership peaked in 2006 at almost 11,000 students. Last year, we were down to 8495, which is about a 22% decline over that almost 2 decades, 19 years. One of the things that you're going to see as we move forward, I'm giving you a little bit of bottom line up front here. We are going to have a forecast that we're going to look at. It's not going to just be one line. It's going to be 3 different lines, low, medium, and high. And what you're going to see is that number is in the central forecast, declining slightly over the next 10 years. In the low forecast, it's declining a little faster, kind of matching some of the more recent trends that we've seen in Bedford County Public Schools. And then on the high end, we're looking at slight growth, a couple of percentage points. And one of the things that we see is over the last decade or so, what has declined the fastest has been elementary. That's normal, right? Like if births are declining, elementary is going to decline first. But there's also other patterns here, things like folks who will put their kids in private school until high school and then bring them back in. Those things happen as well. But one of the big things we're seeing is that drop off in elementary enrollment. So that's a big piece of this forecast. So let's talk a little bit about the forecast. How did we get there? We use something called the cohort survival or grade progression ratio methodology. Basically what we do, and I have a slide right after this that visualizes this if you're a visual learner, is we follow each grade cohort forward year to year using recent post-COVID transitions. Really a way you could think about this is, if you have kindergartners in 24, 25, how many of them are in first grade when you look at 25, 26? It's a ratio, so you're just dividing one by the other. If that number is larger than 1, you have more in the second year in first grade. If it's lower than 1, you have less. So What you know is if you have a larger number, you're having migration in. That's great for every grade, first grade through 12. What we can't get to is how do you get kindergartners? And that's where we need to look at the entering class, and what we usually do in this type of demography is to look at resident births, so resident being all of the county, 5 years earlier, and calculate what we call a birth to kindergarten capture ratio. It's the same type of ratio, it's just lagged 5 years instead of 1. So we're looking at those 0-year-olds who were there in 2021, who are then coming to school in 2026. Bedford's births have risen a little bit over the last couple years. Capture has sat below 1 since 2020. That's a change. It used to be above 1 before 2020. Since 2020 has been below 1. So we've created 3 scenarios in our projection, our cohort survival projection, a low, a central, and a high. And these are really built on those observed post-2020 ranges of capture of kindergartners as well as migration. The band is wider on the downside because sustained decline is really the precedent that we've seen over the last 20 years. So it's harder to kind of turn over that precedent versus it's easier to continue it on or even increase it. Development and student yield is another thing that we look at. So we're looking at the known housing pipeline. Here we talk to the planning department. Myself and Mr. Hagler talked a lot. I know you look at development as well. But we got everything that has been proposed to the county. I also looked at all of the building permits because much of the building that occurs is by right. And so we don't actually need to, go through the planning department for that. We actually want to look at the building permits. So I have a weekly, basically download coming of building permits as well that I'm incorporating into our analysis. So we place them in their true attendance zones by parcel and multiply by measured and modeled students per home or yield by zone. And that by zone piece is really important. And you'll see a map later why. Then we net those things out twice. Again, I know this gets really complicated, so feel free to ask questions at the end about this, but basically with our cohort survival methodology, if you think about it, what we're doing if we're measuring kindergartners to first grade is we are looking at historic patterns that include both migration as well as new building, right? Because building happened during that and people moved in. What we're looking for when we're doing development and student yield modeling on top of that is additional development that is above and beyond historical precedent. So when people say a lot of development is going on, we should see a lot of growth. The question is a lot of development going on versus historical precedent or not? And so that's the type of model we're building. And then finally, we do anchor this to official state memberships or historical data are cross-checked against the district's own data as well as the district's own projection. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit already with the cohort survival methods. Again, there's tons of different things people call this: cohort component, cohort survival, grade progression ratio. Sorry, sometimes I call it different things, but they're all the same thing. And this is the projection that ages each grade forward. Again, we start with today for each grade, and then we look at the following grade the next year. And then we seed kindergarten from births. And then from there, once you create that projection, it's just simple accounting. You're just adding up the students after that. So what does this look like? I find this is called a Sankey chart. I find Sankey charts really terrible, except in this case, although it is a little small to look at here. What we have on the left-hand side is kindergarten at Thomas Jefferson in 24-25. This is made up, this is not the actual data, to first grade in 25-26. And what we want to think about is how many students are from kindergarten in year 1 end up at Thomas Jefferson in year 2. But that's not just students that were there. Sorry, I'm going to get up and point to things because I used to teach. So we have kindergartners who were at Thomas Jefferson in the first year that made it to Thomas Jefferson in year 2. You also have some that went to a different UCPS school. They would not be included in that. grade progression ratio. They would be included in the other school. Then you also have folks that left the division, left the school district. But you also have folks who are at another BCPS school in year one that moved to Thomas Jefferson, and folks that moved from out of the division. And so at the end of the day, you add those up, you have 96 in year two, you had 90 in kindergarten year one. That ratio is 1.07, but it's hiding a lot of what's going on, right? Some of it is people carrying over, some of it is people coming from outside, some of it's people coming from inside from another school. So it's a complicated kind of net measure that we need to be thinking about as we're netting out development as well. Okay, so what has been happening with kindergarten in Bedford County? Most of the difference between the three scenarios for Bedford County, and I will say this is the case for most schools when I look at them, is the size of the entering kindergarten class. In fact, a lot of what a really good indicator of school growth or school decline, kind of before it happens, is looking at the kindergarten class versus the 12th grade class year over year, over year, over year. Because if you're entering a smaller class every year than you're graduating, you're gonna get smaller, right? That's a good way to look at it. So births have risen and kind of recovered from the one really low year that you had in 2020, up to 2020, or it was 2019, sorry, up to kind of a little lower than historical average in 2023. Those children are starting between kind of last year, this year, and 2028. However, capture has not recovered to what it was post-2020. So kindergarten has run below the birth cohort for 5 years straight since 2020, and it was above it every year before. So that's when we're thinking about how we're going to forecast, that's one of the things that we look at. Are we looking at trends that happened before 2020 or only ones that looked after 2020? Kindergarten generally has been flat. It was 602 in each of the last 2 years, and the central case is putting it at about 622 this year. At the end of the day, our September 30 count will settle this. We'll know relatively soon what that actual number is. Okay. So that's how we get to a grade progression ratio based model. Then we need to look at all that building that's going on throughout the county, pointing out there like that's where it's happening. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to think about when a new house is built, how many students are we likely to get out of it? So if we think about it, if you had a new house built down by the lake, would it yield the same number of students as a new house built in the forest sector? And I don't know. Seems like all of you are saying maybe no. That is in fact true. Probably not hard to come to that conclusion. But in general, if you look at Bedford County overall, a new house built relatively recently, in the last 5 years or so, a new single family home will yield about 0.23 K-12 students per home. Those numbers in most districts about 20 to 30 years ago were closer to 0.5 or 0.6. And most districts have come down to a number like this. This is not an abnormal number. However, a lot of people kind of stop there and just say, okay, we're going to calculate it for the whole district and just say that's your yield. But in a place that varies a lot by location, it's important to actually look by attendance zone. And one of the things that we see is yield varies by about 2.5x by location if we look at elementary attendance zones in Bedford County. So New London and Forest are all, what we're looking at in the chart on the right-hand side is just elementary school yield, are all above 0.10. They're at like 0.14, 0.15. Whereas if you look at Huddleston and Moneta, we're looking at 0.05 students per new housing unit. So a big difference of a new house down by the lake versus up in the forest corridor. So if you look at this, I love maps. Maps are fantastic to look at. If we want to look at student yield by elementary zone for elementary students only, you can kind of look at how that's happening throughout the district. Again, I'm sorry, it's a little small on the screen. I promise it's much larger on mine, which doesn't help you. But what you can see is, again, that Forest and New London, those zones are the darker blue, and those are bringing in more students. Kind of throughout the middle of the county, you are seeing the slightly darker colors, and those are kind of in the middle, around 0.10. And then both in the north and the south, we're seeing those lower yield rates for new construction. Okay, so new housing doesn't just add a student per home. You can't just say, oh, we have a new house, we're gonna have a new student. And we don't always just necessarily build a home just because it's proposed, right? So there are 5 things that we have to do to really go from proposed housing units or permitted housing units to actual student yield. So the first is we just need to actually collect the pipeline, and that's what I was talking about, talking to the planning department, pulling permits from their online sites. Then we need to start discounting things by stage. So this is always hard, right? We know that something that is proposed in different counties has a different likelihood of completion. Here, we have chosen some kind of representative for the region discounts by stage. These are things that we can talk about, but these are representative for the region of if it's under construction, you're generally about 95% to not just complete, but getting people in that house where that student yield would actually apply. Permitted is about 90% and proposed is lower at 40%. We did also have a few that were unknown. We put those at around 50 to 60% depending on what information we could glean about them. So we have every known unit in the county planning file is about 35.5 units. Many of those were already built, so we have about 1,700 that are not built. And if we apply the discounts, we get to about 1,000 expected units that will give yield over time. So the next thing we need to do is not say all those students are going to hit in 26, 27. We need to phase those by stage. So later stages are going to deliver sooner. Obviously, if it's already under construction, you're going to have students in that faster than if it's proposed. Under construction lands over, usually we do 1 to 2 years. I did 2 years here. A proposed tract that needs rezoning, platting, and permits first starts at least 3 years from now. And then we have to actually compete for capacity. So Bedford builds about 281 homes a year over the last 10 years or so. And that's kind of a constraint, right? Pipeline units draw from that total. So we are looking both at the proposed pipeline, but also what we think the forecast of permits is going to be into the future as well, of things that don't have to go through the planning department. And then we get to apply that yield that we talked about in the maps. So it's a multi-stage process of estimating and forecasting development. And what you've all actually been waiting for, instead of just hearing me talk about methodology, is what does it mean for Bedford County Public Schools? So if we're looking at the forecast with development, our central forecast is about 3,500 students by 2035, which is down about 1.6%, which to compare that to the last decade is not as much of a decrease as it has been over the last decade. On the low side, we're closer to looking at what the last couple historical series have looked like at 76.42, which is about a 10% decline over 10 years, so about a percentage point per year. And on the high end, we actually are forecasting slight growth, so 1.4% growth over the next 10 years. So development does impact things, but the biggest thing it does is move demand around the county. So that's one of the big things that we want to kind of talk about next.
Chris,
So, yes.
Interrupt you.
Yep.
Actually, I don't, but I'm gonna interrupt you.
Just interrupt me, it's fine.
Yeah, going back one slide for me.
Yep.
So I know you've got a low, medium, high.
Yep.
If we go based on historical trends though, more than likely it's going on your low end more than it's the medium.
Yes, but if you're just going on historical trends, you're also missing some of the increases in births that have happened over the last couple of years. And you're missing some of where that development is happening versus where it's happened historically as well. So I would say yes in general, I think my most likely scenario is, most likely is central, like we built it to be central. But if I had to put money on it, it would be central and a little below it, which is also why we go from a negative 1.6% over 10 years. Our low end is negative 10%, whereas our high end is only positive 1.4%. So the top side, your upside is just much lower than your downside.
Thanks, man.
Okay, so where does that development pipeline really move demand? This is not going to be surprising, I'm guessing, to any of you, but we are gaining in New London, Forest, and Thomas Jefferson, and basically slightly losing students in all the other places. This isn't necessarily because there isn't development happening there, it's the yield together with where development is happening. The other thing that we looked at is moves within the district. So when a new home is built, let me go by show of hands. How many of you have moved homes within Bedford County in your lives? How many of you actually moved attendance zones, if you moved attendance zones? No move on attendance zones? Okay. Well, usually when I ask that question, more hands go up, but that's fine.
We're a stubborn group.
Yeah, you're a stubborn group, that's okay. You love your attendance zone. But one of the things that we kind of look at is not only do folks move in from outside with new housing or even with older housing, but they can move within the district as well. So one of the things we look at is how often is that happening. If we look over the last 10 years, 36% of students have changed address at least once. So not quite half, but quite a few students have changed address. That's over 5,500 of the students, and about 190 of those moves, again, multiple of those. One student could have multiple of those moves, but about 190 of those moves have been into brand new homes. So that's taking up almost 1 year worth of new homes is just in district movement. So just think about that also for the demand for schooling, if some of that movement is also happening internally. Okay, so if we look at the elementary forecast by attendance zone, we're just looking at the central one here. When you get the final report, you're going to have all of them. You're also going to have the actual data. You can create your own visuals if you want. But in general, the overall look here is one of decline in many of the schools, an increase in just a couple in the ones that we already talked about. If we look at middle schools, it's relatively the same, relatively small decreases in 2 of the schools and relatively small increase in Forest. And then for high schools, we're going to have declines, but those numbers are smaller versus the larger number of high school students that you generally have, but still declines for all 3 of the schools. Okay. Enrollment is fun, but not super useful. It's kind of the demand side of the equation. Now we need the supply side of the equation, which is capacity of each of your schools. So before I jump into this, I'm just going to go back here. I did look through all of the capacity work that the team at the district has done. It was all functional capacity. It was very usable for what we were doing. So, gold star there in terms of what we're looking at for capacity. At the end of the day, I wanted to start with utilization by school in 2025-26, so last school year. These are numbers that you all probably already know, and again, when we're talking about utilization, this is simply enrollment divided by that functional capacity. I think you all know Forest Elementary School, pretty close to 100% utilized. And when we go all the way down to the bottom, Stewartsville is about 40%, Big River and Otter River about 50, just over 50%, and Huddleston just around 60%. In general, different districts look at this different ways, but a good target in a declining district is generally somewhere in that 80 to 90% range. So if we look at utilization by level, elementary has the widest spread. Full and tight are places, Forest, Bedford, New London, Thomas Jefferson, and the ones that are half empty are Stewartsville, Big Island, Otter River, and Huddleston. Middle and high are kind of uniformly moderate. The middle schools are 73 to 75%, and high schools are kind of 67 to 80. None super high, none super low. Surplus exists, but it's really not concentrated in the way that it is at the elementary level, and that's why for the rest of the presentation, really we're just going to talk about elementary schools. Okay, so we looked at what utilization is going to be, or it was last year. What is it going to look like in the future? And I want to, again, do some pointing. If we look at this chart, the blue diamond is where we currently are. The reddish, pinkish circle is the central forecast, and then this gray bar is the forecast range, low to high. This dashed red line is 100%, 90%, and 60%. Those are kind of just different areas that we want to be looking. So a couple things you'll notice here. Forest is going up in utilization over 100% is what we're forecasting. Even the low end stays relatively high. If we look at New London, kind of same thing, less upside in New London because there's a little less building than there is in Forest, but still getting pretty close to 100%. A lot of the others, we're looking at way more downside than upside because there's just not as much development with high yield in those places. So as we're thinking about this, we really want to be thinking of kind of the futures of these schools when it comes to utilization, as well as what that means spatially. So one of the things I like to start with is a gross simplification, which is just how many surplus seats do you have as a district? Let's not think about geography right now. Let's not think about transportation. Let's just think about how many seats you have and how many seats you need. And so if we do that, and we look at elementary, middle, and high school, we have in elementary school about 1,500 surplus seats throughout the district. That is a little more than 2 schools of excess capacity. Middle school, 701 seats of surplus. That is not, that's 0 schools of excess capacity. And same for high schools, about 1,000 seats, but that's not quite enough. High school.
Going back to your elementary school numbers.
Yep.
I know we have planned for Stewartsville to close. These numbers included Stewartsville.
This still includes Stewartsville. Sorry, I should have said that.
Yeah.
This is still, we are starting, and you'll see on the next slide that it does. But so really the takeaway from this slide, consolidation capacity is really an elementary question, not a middle and high school question. Again, I think we all probably already knew that, but I just want to say that out loud. This is utilization only, it's geography blind. It's what capacity allows, not what we're necessarily recommending. But it also, to your point, does count Stewartsville. Okay. Current, low, medium, and high. How many schools could be consolidated based on the idea that you do not want overall district utilization over 90%? Currently, the answer to that question is 2. Again, this is a gross simplification. We're not looking at geography here, we're just looking at utilization. Current being 25, 26, that number is 2, but we're actually 12 students from 3. If we look at low, the low forecast 10 years out, that answer moves up to 3, and we're actually about 48 students from 4. Central and high are both still point to 2, like current. Central is a little closer to consolidating 3, whereas high is, half of an elementary school from consolidating 3. So it's a lot closer to like the truer 2 question. So at the end of the day, this overall supports the idea of the Stewartsville capacity closure. It brings the question of if further consolidation also should be considered or not. So this is another way to look at the same thing. I like to look at things many ways because I know different people get the point looking at things different ways. Here in this table, we are looking again at current, central, high, and low. No action would be not including Stewartsville. So Stewartsville stays open here. What the board's already committed to, Stewartsville closing. Further consolidation, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this gives you an idea of what overall elementary utilization would be for the district in those different cases. Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily the actual final outcome, because we have a lot of other things, which we'll talk about what those other things we need to talk about are before you can actually make those decisions.
Before we move off this slide.
Yep.
Actually, not a question for you.
Yep.
So you can take a break.
Okay.
Dr.
Take a
Williams,
drink.
what is our in an ideal, perfect world, if it was, everything was even, what would we be looking for as far as utilization of our schools?
Under 90%, right, Randy? Is
Yeah,
that what we talked about?
I think Chris mentioned that earlier, you're looking at your probably, was it 85 to 90?
Usually what I'm looking for is
You
with
said
wiggle
with the
room,
declining enrollment.
80 to 90. Yeah,
If you got a district growing, you probably want to be lower than that because you've got a lot of.
yeah, you want to, you're almost
Stagnant or declining enrollment,
Yeah.
80 to 90, 85 to 90, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say a lot of school districts don't get there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do want to state that as well because, you know, as we're going through this, we want to put out the words of how this, these are hard decisions. These are hard decisions that affect kids and affect families. And so it can be hard to make those decisions, but a good goal is generally that 80 to 90%. Over 90 can start, I think as Randy has said in the past, over 90 can start feeling a little tight, as we're probably seeing in Forest right now. Even though it's not officially above 100%, it can feel tight at times, right? So that 80 to 90 is a pretty good rule of thumb in a declining district.
With the fan going, you tend to talk loud and then go really quiet at the end.
I'm so sorry.
I'm not getting I'm missing the last part.
I run out of air.
You kind of hear your own, and I
Yeah.
can't hear the last part, especially when the fans come. So if you could
Dora,
project a
you
little
wanna
more.
move over here? There's not a fan, right?
Well, there is a fan.
You know what we can do? Chris, would you like to come up here?
Sure.
You'll be closer to the board members.
I think the only issue is I don't know if I can move this there. When we're doing questions, I can move it.
Okay.
I will try to be much louder and just also just raise your hand if you're not hearing. Okay, I'll be watching.
You pay the bills, you can.
There he put
Do
that
not
sign
touch,
on
he's
there.
going.
It says not intended for me.
Accused of that.
As Randy's doing that, we will talk about these two maps, which are the same utilization for the central forecast in both current 25-26 as well as out to 2035. And again, this is just another way to look at the last chart we were looking at, and just gives you an idea of the geographic kind of specificity of what's happening. Okay. Capacity and utilization is one thing. I said that's a very naive way to look at things, a very oversimplified. We need to look at other things as well. Capacity kind of sets that outer limit. And then we also need to score against other factors. So capacity and utilization, we always need to start there. But then we need to look at transportation and geography. We need to look at ride times. We need to look at distances, road hazards, natural barriers. I know that was brought up during the pitch. And just understanding how long children will be on buses. That's something we absolutely have to look at and take into account. The other thing is community and feeders. This idea of keeping neighborhoods together, keeping elementary, middle, and high school feeder patterns coherent, that's another thing we need to be looking at. We also need to be looking at kind of equity and student need. Are these things equivalent throughout the district? And how are boundary changes distributing students by other needs like special education, free and reduced lunches? We also need to look at, which we've started today, looking at the growth trajectory of each of the schools and making sure that we're not just planning for today, but for the future as well. And then finally, we want to look at things like facility condition and age as well. So a school can be underutilized and still be the wrong one to consolidate, is kind of what I want to say. But a school can a school that is underutilized and has other things going against it often can kind of come up to the top of that list. Okay, so how do we score those options? It's going to kind of go back to the last slide. So it's a lot of the same things, but when you all see me start building scenarios on September 10th, these are some of the things you're going to see me score. We're going to be looking at capacity fit. Does projected utilization with development keep schools relatively under capacity, but also relatively balanced? Another thing we always look at is impacting the minimal number of students. So the number of students moved is always another metric we look at. Transportation impact, this is change in ride time and distance. As an aside, I do my own route optimization in my software. It is not exactly the same as the routing software, but it is close. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but it gives us a good idea to score against. Some of that equity balance. So again, how is utilization mapped across the district, as well as things like free and reduced lunch and special education? And feeder and community integrity, are neighborhoods kept whole, and do we have those elementary, middle, high feeders preserved? And I know in your case, the middle and high have to stay also together since they ride the same bus. And then is there future flexibility? Are we not putting a school right at 95% when we're redoing this? Okay, now I get to stop talking a little bit and ask you all questions, as well as obviously opening it to questions that you all have for me. So I just want to go through, I have a couple slides of these, I want to go through them, and then we'll come back to them. I want you guys to start thinking about them, but then I want to let you all ask me questions first, and then we'll come back to these. So some of my questions for you, number one, does it feel like we're missing anything in our modeling? That's always a question that I want to have. We've done a lot of work both with you, with the administration, as well as with local partners like the planning department to make sure that we're not missing anything, but you all have the most local knowledge, so I always want you asking those questions. The next is, what matters most to you? As we're going back and weighing those options for redrawing zones, for making consolidation decisions, how should we rank those trade-offs? So when we go back to here and we're talking about capacity fit, moving students, transportation impact, equality throughout the district between attendance zones, how do you rank those things? Because it's not always possible to optimize every single one of them at the same time. And to that point, where are your hard lines? Are there things that are off the table, or are there must-haves that absolutely need to be on the table for you? And then there's also a few operational decisions I want you to start thinking about as we go through this process. One is grandfathering. Sometimes when folks redraw boundaries, should we be allowing current students, or at least rising 5th and 8th graders, should they be allowed to finish out where they were, even if their boundary was moved or not? That's something that you want to start thinking about. Do we want to look at more buildings, or do we just want to be looking at boundaries, or do we want to look at both? And then what do you want your timeline and phasing to be? In a perfect world, do you want to, if you're consolidating one school for sure in 27, 28, any consolidation decisions or redistricting decisions, are we trying to do everything in that same year? So that's another piece for you to be thinking about. So I have the next steps on here. We can talk through that a little bit, but really what I want to do first, before I let you go back to those questions and think about them more, is to ask if you have any questions of me first.
Any questions? Ms. Thompson?
I'm gonna say, excellent job, excellent presentation. I'm very thankful that you put this all together. I asked a lot of my questions during the presentation, so I feel bad now. So I do have, one of the things I wanna look at as well is, and I don't know how we determine this, and this might not even be a you question, maybe more of an us question, is, something we wanna look at is, the financial impact of it. The moving schools around, does that make any financial impact? I think we have pretty evenly represented school systems here, but is there financial impact to it? And I don't know that you can pull numbers from that. Other things I want to make sure, you spoke on transportation. Looking at how you look at things, how would you determine whether transportation poses a problem? You know, everything's very flat on a map. So how do you come up with that?
So the way that we do this is we've already been given most of the transportation file from the district, which is all of your bus routing, which includes things like hazards or bridges that you can't go over with a school bus. The other thing that we're doing is, I mean, I'm sure most of you use Google Maps, right? Google Maps knows a windy road versus a straight road, a road that you can drive 20 on versus one you can drive 60 on. We are using similar data to be able to optimize our routes as well. So at the end of the day, we're not just doing straight line distance when we're looking at it. I mean, that is always the first step. We just look at from a person's house to a school, how far is it? Straight line. And then we look at how far is it following the most reasonable path to school. So following all the roads. And then the other thing that we look at, which not as huge of an impact here, though can still have an impact, is traffic times as well. So there's a lot of data on, commute times. And so you actually look at what that looks like. And then the final thing we layer on, which is where the routing stuff comes in, is, okay, if we moved all these students this way, redrew the boundary, what would be the most reasonable optimized bus route or bus routes for those students? And again, it takes into account not just a flat map. It's looking at road networks, it's looking at any of those hazards that you can't pass, things like that.
And just kind of using your own metrics here on the, you had 6 points you were looking at, I believe. So I know we have voted as a board to shut down Stewartsville Elementary at the end of this academic year. Based on these 6 metrics, from a demographic standpoint, was that the best decision moving forward?
So I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I'm going to kick the can down the road and say, I think that we need to look at that together with all of the decisions that we're making, because we need to I need to know what's important to you to redraw boundaries, and I can't until I redraw boundaries, I can't say if it was the right decision or not, right? So part of it is actually redrawing those boundaries and understanding, can we achieve a good outcome for transportation, for kind of balance throughout the district, for feeder and community integrity with Stewartsville being closed. And so just until I have your feedback on that, I can't officially say it, let's put it that way.
That's fair.
Chris, I have a question.
Mhm.
Have you looked, I know you mentioned it, but I don't know if you've looked into it more extensively. You had mentioned weighing whether or not a school should be kept open based on its integrity, like the physical integrity of the school, as well as, its location and where.
Yep.
Have you looked into the integrity of the schools and which ones maybe need to be considered for that respect?
And so that is not something I've looked into as deeply yet until we're starting to make these decisions, but that's something that we will be talking about as part of the process as well between now and September 10th.
That data would come from, we've done some facility studies and some analysis. And so some of those are a little bit more dated, but if nothing's been done to the building, it really hasn't changed in the last 8 to 10 years. So some of that will be supplied school specific as he asked a question, but I haven't provided that, nor has he dug into that part yet. That's yet to come.
Okay, and according to the chart that you showed us, we could potentially close 3 schools and still be within the 80 to 90%, or would you say that 2 schools?
So for the central forecast, you would be above 90% if you closed 3, if you consolidated 3 schools. On the low end, you would be at 84%. On the high end, you'd be at 94%. So I mean, if we're looking at kind of those metrics and looking at utilization only, that would argue for, that would be a riskier move
Yeah.
than to.
All right. I'll ask one question before we go back to the other sets of questions. So this is just stuff that we've heard externally. So I'll just ask it. In your experience of doing this work, looking at comparable school districts, what effects positively or negatively have you seen on home values if lines get redrawn? People will say, I bought a home in this area to go to the school. I spent more money to do it. Now it's going to be in a different, oh my goodness. So can you address that?
So, I mean, I will say I'm not a real estate person or an economist. So I will give that a grain of salt. But I think that impact depends a lot on things like differential quality of schools and things like that. So that's really a big depending factor on those things. And it is something that you always see people concerned about. I don't necessarily have the data to say, here's the impact, here's not the impact, but I do have the logic to say what it generally relies on, which is that any differential quality concerns folks have.
Yeah. And look, we'll get into the other questions. I will say, for me, I'm looking for, overall, I would say I would take nothing off the table, and I would have every option out there to drive the best efficiency for the long-term success of the entire county. And I believe that if you do that, even if there is some schools that maybe we have to consolidate or other things we need to think of, if we still have a whole pie, and now our money can go further in that pie, there's a lot of things we can take care of. We just toured 2 schools today where we just did 2 renovations on the high schools, and they look unbelievably. State-of-the-art was thrown around several times, and it's true. If you have state-of-the-art facilities, if we have more money to take care of our teachers and to pour more money into the programs to get better results, I don't think people have to worry about their home where it is, because if all the schools are just operating at the top level, I think you're right. I think there's parity there when you go from school to school in that thing. So that's what I think we would all want. But I will turn it back over to you for the rest of the questions.
One more question.
Oh,
Your matrix slide, your 6 points. I know you kind of briefly touched equity and student or equity balance.
Yep.
How do you measure something like that? As far as like, how do you put that into an equation?
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm looking at is current state versus what future state would be. So if things are changing a lot, either in a positive or negative direction, that's how we're scoring it. So this would be equity balance, free and reduced lunch if it was like you had a relatively like even spread throughout the district, and then all of a sudden you're just putting them all in one school. Like that would measure poorly on this measure. Same thing with special education or other programs that we want to measure. Sorry, I was starting to go down there at the end, running out of air. The other thing that we look for at equity and balance is also just generally even utilization throughout the district as well.
That's what I got right now.
all right.
There will be more, I'm sure.
To the point on goals, overall high-level goals, this is something, again, that I feel like I see from different clients of being at different places in this journey. And for a lot of them, not of their own making, being in a spot where it's like they haven't consolidated schools and they needed to a long time ago, and that makes it even harder. And it makes it harder for a couple of reasons. It makes it harder for community reasons, like utilization's been low for a long time and we haven't closed schools, so why are we doing it now? But also start thinking about, okay, if you have 1 or 2 properties that you're putting on the market and potentially maybe trying to sell, that's very different than putting 5 on the market, right, in a district like this, or in other more like larger districts I've worked in, instead of 5 or 6, we're talking 20 or 30 buildings all at the same time. And so just thinking of those type of things as well, and how the buildings could be used is also another piece.
I had one more question, and I know you might not be able to answer this personally, but when we consolidated, in your experience, when you've consolidated schools, there's also consolidation of amount of teachers, correct?
I mean, it depends on how you're planning, right? And that's another part of the process that the administration and the board have to go through is how are you going to deal with going from the number of buildings and how they're staffed to the future? And I would say that's just something that you have to look at the way different districts have done it. And some do it looking at some natural attrition that occurs.
Right.
And so it's just a question of kind of what the feel is within your district and the directions that you can go. Open up different options based on kind of the different consolidation options we have. So to me, that's like we have to start with what it is we're gonna do and think about the impacts as we're doing it, but then have a good plan moving forward.
I would add a comment that all of our schools really, I'd say, most of the positions are staffed based upon a staffing standard, based upon how many kids. So most of the positions, teachers, paraprofessionals and stuff, would probably go wherever the kids were going if there was a consolidation. But that's not the case for all positions. You know, you've got a principal, but there's usually some turnover. And, you know, and so a lot of times we can place those, but I'll be honest, there's no guarantees that Dr. Calvert and HR could do that for every position. So you got a lot of things to look at that. Probably for the teachers and aides, I don't think there would be a problem, unless you close like 5 schools at one time. But a lot of those teachers and aides are gonna go with the kids. There's not gonna be a sharp decline in the amount of teachers you're carrying, because we do it on a calculation of how many kids are. So if you had 200 kids here, you had 200 kids here, it's about the same amount of teachers. Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that that's the case and the attrition is also gonna affect it. I just, yeah, that's gonna be, it's a complicated thing, because how many classrooms do we have in these how many kids would be in 5th grade? How many,
Yep.
you know, that's just there's so many different variables, so.
And that is definitely, when we look at the classrooms and all that, like that's part of the functional capacity piece of this as well. But we also have to look at it as we're going in and creating these scenarios, we do have to look at it kind of grade by grade as well, right?
Okay, that's what.
Especially when we're looking at like kindergarten, stuff like that, you
Yeah.
have enough kindergarten classes since they're different. And same with special ed, you have to look at the needs there as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move into this. So I am open to you all doing this however you would like to answer. We can go through question by question or just whatever hits you on this first page. But again, the questions are, is there anything that you feel like we're missing currently? I know we're missing a lot when it comes to the actual proposed different options. That's gonna come September 10th, but are we missing anything from what we're talking about today? What matters most to you, and where are the hard lines? Are there any hard lines, either on the positive or negative side? So I'll open that up first.
I think for me, some of the most important, I don't know about what's missing, but some of the most important things for me is the ride times, as well as trying to protect so not as many kids are displaced, families displaced. Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me, is just the least impact on the kids.
I'm in Forest, huge capacity issues already, but also traffic. We have a lot of high density housing coming, affordable, aimed at families. So I know that everybody does the best they can guessing how many students are gonna come into those areas, but I know in our neighborhoods, I think we're all concerned, especially for our elementary kids, that it's gonna be beyond what we're guessing. But beyond that, and I know this is a VDOT issue as well, our traffic is pretty terrible. tomorrow morning is gonna be interesting. I beg all of you to experience it. Just getting out of neighborhoods is really, really hard. So taking into account which direction traffic is coming from, we do have a cross guard that stops in one way because of lights, not allowed, like, they can't, the intersections cannot be blocked off. So we can't get out of our neighborhoods on the other one. Like, it's an issue on where the traffic, where the students are coming just to go to our schools. And I understand that's a VDOT problem. But we do have multiple apartment complexes that go to a very small school that's almost at 100% capacity.
Yeah.
So, those are just items that I wanna keep in mind. Also, are we gonna have the opportunity to talk to our constituents and what is important to them as well? Because again, we do know our areas best, but there are parts of my community that I don't experience on a daily basis, and they might have concerns that I don't know. I have hoped that people would reach out by now, but I also hope that after this conversation, people would really start thinking, we need to hear from you. So just keep in mind, I'm speaking from what I know tonight, but I hope in the coming days we'll have more people reach out to us and say, hey, you forgot this.
Yes.
And it's something that's important, so.
Yeah, and that's the best outcome we can have. The earlier we can have that feedback, the better, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, just to give you an idea, and I'm sure this is exactly what you expect. Once we actually talk about the options, we will probably get the most feedback.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Earlier is better. So
Yes.
like anyone who's hearing that, please, earlier is
Earlier is
better.
better.
But that is gonna happen. I don't know if you all wanna talk at all about kind of longer term plans for.
We can do that
Go through
after,
at the very
let's go
end.
through and make sure everybody
Yep.
has addressed those for you first.
Yeah. But I mean, I would also love to talk a little bit more about the specific traffic issues. I'm not, like, we're not fixing them, right? But we can look at having better models of what we're building, at least.
Right.
Knowing what the actual constraints are, because I don't know, like in our files, I don't know that we necessarily know where those closed streets would be and stuff like that, so.
Right, absolutely. And again, it's I think all the teams working together to figure out, but I do know it is a pressure point in our community. We have so much housing going up. And the traffic is a concern, and all levels of these decision makers have to be involved in it. But just at the starting point, when we're making decisions about kids in our district, I feel like as the growth happens, District 4 is going to be smaller and smaller because we can only accommodate as so many students. And then we have schools, great schools nearby that can take more, as Otter River, so, and Boonesboro do a little bit of growing as well. So I mean, that's just something to keep in mind. Absolutely, we don't want to disturb families and kids and move them where it's not necessary, but it's definitely something that we have to think about in our area. Just, we will have to be a little bit smaller for our zones, elementary zones, that is.
For me personally, I don't see anything that you're missing. I think that you have listened well to the mandate that we've given you, and your priorities are aligned with what we were asking you to do. And I think as we kind of hone in on options, that we'll have a lot more questions and a lot more input. So, and I think that the things that, I don't have a hard fast line. I think that whatever is necessary is what we ought to do. So, wide open. Thank you.
So, as far as missing local realities, I would say not that you're missing this, but just something that I think is, whether it's just perceived or it's actual. I went to school here many years ago, back in the Stone Ages. We've always experienced the Forest Zone, the Liberty Zone, the State River Zone, that there is differences in between the zones. And you do something to one zone, the other two are upset about it, and vice versa. So maybe, I don't know how you factor this in, but just something to be aware of is if we're more heavily working on one zone outside of the other, just kind of being aware that those perceptions exist. Whether or not they're true, it's not, perception is reality sometimes. So just making sure that, that's just information of, you wouldn't get that looking at, demographically. Especially the fourth zone is our growth zone. It gets a lot of infrastructure outside of schools. It gets a lot of, attention because it's growing. Those are something to just be aware of within those. As far as creating, are we answering all three questions right now?
You answer as many, yeah.
All right. Okay. As far as creating like a weighted decision matrix, I think the list that you have is pretty good. I think I would maybe flip. Perfect. On these 6 here, I think capacity and moving students, I would weight heaviest of all of them. I think the obviously transportation equity are important. I'd probably flip those two around if I'm making this weighted matrix. Feeder communities, keeping those together is important, but you're gonna have to do some movement there. We have just shooting the last year, we've reunified a neighborhood that was literally split down the middle. And so I think that's gonna exist as a whole. But as far as creating a weighted matrix, I think kind of how you have it listed is pretty darn close.
I kind of stated a little earlier where my head was at. You're not missing anything, so I'm sure, but you had mentioned that it's hard to capture like homes and stuff or developments that are by right.
Yeah.
So how often, you check every week to see the housing, so you'll capture that as long as it's within the time frame of us making the decision?
Yep.
Okay. You had brought up traffic. Obviously, there's a lot of people going to work at that time. It's not necessarily going to school, but traffic's traffic, car's a car.
Yeah.
Bus is a lot bigger than a car. But I wonder if the analysis would also show us maybe that we need to adjust start times in the county a little bit, a half hour here or there. Maybe that helps alleviate some stuff too. I don't know. It was just a thought. A lot of these things that you look at the matrix and how to weight them, I think it's pretty tough to try to figure out how to weight them because they all are important. So that I think is pretty tough. So that's why I was like, I think we just got to come up with, where do we come up with the greatest impact for the long-term success? I think that's where we should start, and then we can start kind of tweaking a little bit. But we heard in the last 2 days when we talked to these principals about these auditoriums, how we it wasn't great, but it was like the cost of progress was we had to have these 2 auditoriums shut down for a year. But everyone in there now is like thrilled because they know it was the right move to do and it was the right move for the future. So I'm sure these moves are tough no matter what we do. But the intent of trying to make these moves is to make that best decision for everybody moving forward. And I think that's ultimately what, as a board, that I think we are trying to do. You've asked us our priorities on these questions and we still have some time. So I actually would like to ask staff to say, what's important to you guys? I think that's important. So we get your feedback, we have our feedback, we're gonna get stuff on the 10th, then we're gonna get community feedback, and we're gonna put this sandwich together, so.
Well, I'll go first because I kind of tried to spearhead this. I heard a couple things, traffic. So I don't know how to get you that, but we'll try to look at that. Financial impact of the options, I'll have to do those calculations for you, Chris. So when you present any options, what are the financial impact? I think I heard everything's on the table. So if options are out there, I know, and Stuart's here earlier, we talked about portables or expanding buildings. So those may be some options or something, instead of boundaries and stuff. But right now we're looking at boundaries and what that's least costly and stuff. So we'll look at all that. So those are some follow-ups that I can do with Chris and provide him some data. So if there's any options, what do I do? What's the calculation on the financial impact? So I'll make sure I have that ready. Start times, I'll leave that to Karen, but we'll address that later.
Not staggering.
So 2 things, Chris, I'll ask you this, and I'm sorry if I'm putting you. in our capacity calculations, we backed out preschool for where they're located now.
Yep.
So were you using the adjusted capacity minus the preschools?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
So what you were looking at were the capacity projections, assuming our preschools are gonna stay where they are, which is probably the most conservative approach. If you took out the preschool, it's like, oh yeah, you got a lot more capacity and you really don't. So we have to consider the preschools with whatever we're doing and moving around. And I'll have to work very closely with Dr. Woodford on that if there's anything like that where the preschools go, do they fit? So we'll be on top of that. Number two,
Sorry,
yes,
you're saying they were included in the,
They were backed out.
he used adjusted capacities for where we have preschools right now. So our capacities, when he was looking at student enrollment, he was looking at lower capacities for the building because we have preschool in some classrooms.
I see, okay.
So that was the conservative approach. They're already baked in there.
Okay.
One thing that we'll also have to look at one of the things like you brought up was grandfathering, which is a tough decision.
Can of worms.
But on top of that, I'll layer what Dr. Woodford's been presenting and the difficulty and a lot of things we have with zone transfer requests. You do something like this and what do we do with that? So I think grandfathering and zone transfer requests will have to be something, once we get all the information, you're gonna move forward, we're gonna have some decisions on that too. So be thinking about that as a board. We don't have a proposal right now, but we'll bring back some data on that and some recommendations, but you're gonna have to wrestle with that too, because anything that's projected and as an option and you choose, if everybody's grandfathered and everybody can zone transfer, it blows up. So I'm not saying you can't do any of it, but we gotta be very careful. So I'll just give those as caveats and feedback to the board. That's all I have on top of my mind there.
How dynamic is the scenarios that you're giving? Are we able to like play with some of the numbers with it, like?
Yeah, it will be dynamic. We will need to kind of play with it a little together to do it. Like what will be kind of public facing is not as dynamic as like what I'm working on. But there is an ability for us to like actually say, okay, what if we move this here? What if we move that?
So we can run some
do
if
that.
then scenarios.
Yeah, you just don't want to necessarily do it live because like if you do it live, it's having to re-optimize transportation and that isn't something that runs in 5 seconds. Like it takes 10, 15 minutes to run. Yep.
I'll turn it over to the other staff if they have.
I think my biggest concern, and I think I said it the last time we were together, was just the financial cost of keeping it in a capacity school. When you look at the SOQ and you look at what the state pays for and what locally we have to pay for. And I think that's a big issue with me. And also, I spent the last 4 days driving this county to every school except one. And transportation will be a difficult thing to do just because some of these schools are so remote.
Yep.
And so obviously we gotta address that as well, but and then of course, to me, it goes back to the financial, it's the cost of keeping old buildings alive.
Yep.
And that's kind of what Randy was talking about, we need to do a study on that. Where are we spending our money when we wouldn't necessarily have to?
Absolutely.
I would have to agree with Randy. I think my biggest concern is our zone transfer policies or school transfer policies we currently have in place. And also the influx of non-resident requests on the forest side. That's put a lot of strain on our schools that are already strained. And so I think we really need to look at that because it's causing a few problems. We want kids, but
Yeah.
we could put them in where we had the most
Hoping-
capacity, yeah.
We're hoping we get from the other side too.
A few.
But if we can, if there's some restructuring around and we get those numbers to 90 or whatever, then there might be a little bit, I guess, so.
Yeah.
But that's something to think about.
For me, I kind of agree with Mr. Hill, kind of the flow of the 6 areas, the way they're aligned, being the guy that works with the transportation department. I appreciate transportation being kind of up in the middle, top there, but I do think capacity and students moved the way that flows.
I pretty much agree. Cost, capacity, I see what we're paying for smaller schools in comparison. It would be nice if it was more equitable.
As far as zone transfers, or not, what do you call it, when they come into the county, like from Lynchburg?
That's those are non-resident, so we have a lot of just school transfers within the zone.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of that's due to daycare options and after-school care. And then most of our non-resident requests that we've received since we lowered tuition are coming in from the Lynchburg city side, wanting to go to New London or Thomas Jefferson or Forest Elementary. We were able to move some to Otter River. They were willing to go over. There wasn't enough room in Boonesboro for the grade level. So, I mean, we've tried to bring everyone in. But it's just, we were having more requests on that side.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, you have somebody who's at Forest Elementary, and then you move them to Otter River because they don't have the capacity, and then you have somebody from Lynchburg wanting to come into
So we don't.
Forest, yeah, that would be a real problem.
Forest Elementary and New London Academy are closed to any transfers, including non-resident. So that's not an issue. And when we create waiting lists, residents are always at the top. So we're very careful about
I want to make sure that we.
when and who, yeah.
Dr. Trosper, anything?
I wasn't prepared, but
That's okay.
I did like what you said about if there's definitely costs and there's sacrifices that are made, but we need to make sure we remember there's benefits to this as well. And I think if we can explain that, there's a lot of good that can come from what we're doing here. We just need to communicate that as well.
I do have a question for you, Dr. Osler. Because I want to put you on the spot. You don't nearly get on the spot enough.
Tennessee doesn't have a starting quarterback yet.
Way to go. Now I am stressed.
So I know we've talked about very recently the different testing results at the different schools. How does that impact? And obviously, we've not done it here in Bedford County, but just kind of as a metric, if we were to change schools around, is that going to kind of throw off all of your numbers as far as projecting the testing results, instructional? How does that affect an instructional?
I'd say overall it'll probably stay the same, but if you look at some of the individual schools, I can definitely see them changing. If we shift some schools out to other schools that are lower performing, I can see them rising and some maybe dropping. It just depends on who the demographics that come into our schools. And I don't know that it's going to be enough to change our Title I status. I guess I'd have to look at it.
Well, one of the things that Dr. Trosper and I have been looking at are some schools that are kind of getting, I would say, dinged for participation, but they're so small. So our smallest schools also can have the biggest fluctuation in test scores because one child makes such a difference. And so that, I think, would be a positive academic.
So even in that, like, taking kids from, I don't know, Forest and Otter River, that should even out to where it wouldn't hurt as much if one kid has a bad test day.
It's like, it's a great point. The small schools are so fickle with their scores. It could take one really bad year for a staff member, maybe health issues or something like that, where the kids don't quite get the instruction they need. And at that score, it looks like the whole school's not done well. And it's just a few kids. And that it is much less fluctuation in the larger schools or more consistent populations.
My concern is Big Island is low capacity, but a new school, and it's over the hill, so it's gonna be hard to convince any parents to go out there, but it's a nice new school, nice facility. I'm not sure how to address something like that either.
Ms. Jennings?
I think we kind of said a special education, where the students go, we're gonna provide the resources that are needed there. So how to do that. I think our specialized programs would be a consideration, but we look at those all the time and we have to move those at certain times or move it to a certain school because we have more students at that school. So that's not something we don't normally do in special education. So it always impacts all students, but I think, as for special education and resources, we're going to provide those no matter where they are.
Anecdotally, does it, does it affect a student with special needs more severely, moving their known environment to an unknown environment?
Depending on the child and their disability, some of our students do have difficulty with transition, but we always plan for that and we work with them. And they have to transition anyway from, elementary to middle to high school. So there's always transitions happening for students, or a new teacher or a new classroom. So we always make sure we're looking at that, making sure we're addressing those needs and making that easier for them.
Nothing radically different than what's been said. I mean, I think every decision is a hard one, but at the end of the day, in almost every metric we look at, if we boil it down to that, balance is usually better. And so I know we want every kid to be in the smallest classroom in the smallest school and have the lowest ratio. And I'm really thinking through the lens of all the support staff that I work with, our counselors and our psychs and our social workers. The fact of the matter is, the disparity we have right now is great for the kids that are in a tiny school, and it's one counselor or one social worker to 160 kids. That's phenomenal for them. But it really creates the opposite. It creates a significant disadvantage for the kid who gets the same amount of counselors, and there's 500 kids. And so I think that while moves or boundary changes or consolidation, it does seem like a huge hurdle for children and families on the front end. It is. I'm not neglecting that. It's not all bad, because I think that creating more balance, and rather than one school having one counselor, one psych, one social worker to serve, 150, and this school having 500, creating balance probably means all of those kids get better service. I also think, just transparently, almost every position in my department isn't an SOQ position. And so as we think about long-term difficult financial decisions, those are the ones that always kind of get questioned the first, because the law doesn't say we have to have all of them. We know we need them. And so I think if we make more balanced fiscal decisions that prioritize keeping the positions we've really got to have to take care of children, while recognizing that balance might be better than you get a small school and you kind of get shafted.
At the end of the day, we have to spend a dollar a certain way. Where are we getting the best impact with that dollar? On a failing HVAC system, or to make an impact, a positive impact on the lives of our kids? And I think
that gets reflected to the question Dr. Trosper was asked. The same is true in terms of discipline matrix and risk assessment numbers. At a small school, one or two kids might make their percentage rates look terrible, but in reality, it's because one or two kids make a monstrous difference there that at a school of 500 to drop in the bucket. And so balance, I think, brings a lot of good things.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on this side? Good.
Real quick, Barry.
Yes.
If we did consolidate schools, I know we have a lot of investment spent on security and that kind of stuff. Would we be able to utilize that in other areas?
Possibly, yes. The camera systems can definitely utilize, we can pull those out, put them in other schools. A lot of the stuff that we have can be reused. We can kind of spread it out. As I'm sitting here listening to this, as far as IT goes, we're probably the least impacted by, because we're still going to provide the same level of IT support, the same equipment that we've always provided, regardless of the size of the school. But, the investments that have already been made, we would definitely utilize that equipment elsewhere.
So that infrastructure can be utilized.
Yes. Access points, server, all of that we could use it in other locations for sure.
I will add that time factors into the long-term budget, because access points and things that he has to replace, if there was consolidation, one less school would do that. Same amount of teacher laptops, because they're going with the kids,
Yeah.
but access points, smart screens in buildings, cameras, those are on a replacement cycle. And so we have to have funding for that. So that there would be some factor savings into that, so just wanted to add that.
But the equipment that we've already purchased we would use it until end of life, and then we would evaluate at that point if, we don't need to replace it, we won't, but nothing would essentially go to waste. I can assure you, we try to utilize everything that's working that we possibly can.
Yeah. The only caveat to that is, Dr. Wood would know this, I don't know if it's that important, but any money spent with Title I money at a Title I school has to go to another Title I school. You can't Am I wrong in that? Did they change that?
No, it's not really changed, but
Okay.
I don't know that we're buying a lot of that.
We're not buying as much as that anymore as we
Yeah.
used to. We used to be buying a lot of stuff with Title I. I think it's mostly on staffing now.
Yeah, I
So,
think that's what we're.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could say something, not related, but not about this, more so about the next steps.
Okay.
I know Mr. Hill and I had a little conversation about this the other week. Earlier, the board was talking about how to get feedback from your own communities. One way to do this is, of course, hold your own town halls. We can help with that. We can advertise them for you, but ultimately, this is the board's deal, basically, you know. But we can absolutely put it out there if y'all let us know when, where. If you wanted to do it in a school, I would suggest a high school and we get the okay from the principal. Yes. Because there would have to be staff present, you know, for the town hall. Also, thinking about a public hearing. It's the right thing to do, as we've done in the past. We would recommend doing it not at a regular scheduled board meeting. Have a meeting in a centralized location, public hearing only. So basically another,
And we got two new brand new meeting auditoriums on the show.
We do.
well, one of them's not centralized, but.
No, I hear you. Obviously and I definitely think we should do that, but I just wonder, I mean, this presentation was great. I think as we have more information and we coming to something, I think before obviously decisions get made, we should almost do it where they can sit in and see that whole presentation. And then, because that would answer a lot of questions. People still will get up and answer the same questions.
Yeah, I wasn't saying get this on the books now, but I just want the board to be thinking about.
Yeah, no, I think those are great ideas, but I definitely would love to.
Staff was talking, just to let you know, anybody that's listening, the PowerPoint will be on our website under redistricting
Tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Okay.
A link, we're recording this, it's being live streamed but recorded, we'll put that link on there. The same for when Chris comes back on September 10th, we'll record that, that'll be there, and his actual proposal we'll put, so we're keeping our redistricting website updated. And so any dates that the board may add that they want to do a town hall or we do a public hearing will be added onto there too. I absolutely agree, you don't want to do a public hearing before we see something on September 10th, and then you gotta get time for the community to digest that, you get the feedback, and then do maybe a month later or something, looking at a public hearing. I will say, for decision making, I don't know if Mr. Peer was gonna say this, if we are looking at this impacting the following school year, we need to make it before next June. Well, you're looking at a time frame to get the feedback. I don't want to rush the board, but you get to a point where if you postpone it too far into the spring next year, it's going to be hard to implement. So we're looking at, there's already a decision about Stewartsville. You know, and if you don't do boundaries, are we doing mobiles and stuff? There's decisions that have to be made. So for staff, I'll just say this for the rest of us, a December-ish, maybe even first meeting in January, probably the latest for decisions on some of this stuff.
That gives some runway for things.
September, the official options month, then public hearing, town halls. You've got 2-3 months to get the feedback. We can revise the options, get data back for questions that weren't asked, and that we can go back and forth with the public on this and make sure we answer the questions before the board has to make a decision.
You have contracts they have to get out, people gotta know where they're going, so it's a whole, it gets hairy. I mean, we've gotta rely on the state to actually give us the budget.
Transportation, if that's impacted, there's a lot happening behind the scenes that have to get ready, so.
So September 10th is when he's making your recommendations, correct? That should probably be in a bigger venue and make it open to the public, is that what I'm hearing?
It's open to the.
I mean, it's open to the public anyway, but I mean.
It is gonna be streamed and recorded.
Yeah.
We could do that, but that's gonna be the first look where he's presenting options. So I don't know if there's gonna be a lot of feedback that night, because everybody's just getting it.
I think we would probably be doing our public hearings and stuff like that after that, probably in October or something like that. I think that's when we probably would need to do it based on feedback.
So, I know we did this before a couple of years ago where we had options, 4 options. Is that what you're thinking? You're gonna give us some different options?
Yeah, you will have different options.
And so is that something we would present to, or we would choose some of those options ourselves before we do? I just wanted to know.
It's gonna depend on the feedback on the 10th, right? So you all are gonna get to see them. You might see an option and just be like, no, we're not doing that, right? You might say, oh, these are my 3 favorite that I really wanna talk through, but like everyone's gonna see, it's being streamed, it's recorded, everyone's gonna see all of those, 4 to 6 options, depending on where kind of we get to. So it'll be in a slide deck, but it'll also be in an actual website that people can go in and like look at the maps and see information about the different options. And then as you all are getting feedback, we can revise the options as well. So that maybe in that meeting, we keep all 6, or maybe you decide as we move forward, these 2 don't make sense to us as a board. We want to talk about these 4 to make it simpler, to engage the community. So it'll just kind of depend on the feedback that day, where you would go forward with.
So my question to that, Randy kind of alluded to some of the things I was gonna go into, but you've done this numerous times, obviously, so what's your recommended timeline from what you just said, September 10th? Let's say we have 3 options on the table.
Mhm.
What then do you suggest is the public hearing, the town hall? How much time is needed for that? And obviously we want them to be able to get in their town halls,
Yep.
the feedback on the 3 proposals.
Yep.
And so what is your timeline that you normally see?
So I think what would be most useful is after that September 10th, you want people to be able to actually internalize some of what's happening and think about it a little bit. So you don't want to do it like the next week, right? You want to do it 2 to 3 weeks later. You want to start having your kind of public engagement. And then after you have that public engagement, you would have your actual big public hearing. What I would suggest, and a lot of this, I keep saying it depends, but a lot of it is going to depend on what comes out of September 10th. Because it might be that there are some simple things from September 10th where it's like, say I present 6, you really like 3, but the third one tweak X, Y, and Z. Those tweaks could easily be ready by the time in that 2 to 3 week period, where then you're doing your engagement with the public, with your community, with those slightly updated maps.
So those
And so-
updated maps happen before the public hearing.
If it's needed. It might just be that you're like, yes, we love these 3 options, we want to go forward with these to the public hearing. But it might be that we need to do some tweaks. I guess at the end of the day, I would say, we are flexible to what you all need. And what is needed is highly dependent on the geography of the place as well as just the community, right? And so you guys might see some of these and think, these are the questions I'm gonna get, and maybe we need to look at another option that does this thing, And so that's really where we'll get into that. But 2 to 3 weeks after that meeting, I think is kind of the sweet spot. And then from your community engagement, getting those all done in a pretty close period, right? Within a week or 2, the town halls, yes, my words are stopping working at this point. The town halls happening, maybe 2 weeks after that September 10th date. Trying to get those all done within a week or 2, just kind of together if you can actually make that work. So that then, again, you can get feedback from that. It can be provided to me. And any updates that need to happen before the final kind of public hearing.
So, just so I'm clear, September 10th, we are gonna be discussing and saying, yeah, throw out 3 and 5 and do that. We have to make some decisions that day.
Or you could say they're all awesome, I love them.
But
Yes.
we are gonna have that input as far as what our positions would be.
Yep.
And then you would have those fixed or whatever, changed or
Yep.
eliminated
Yep.
by the 3
Yeah.
weeks later or whatever.
Yes. Yep. Generally, the tweaks that we end up seeing, it won't take me that long to update the maps.
I would just wanna remind the board, when you're talking about doing your town halls, remember there can only be two of you together at one time. And I know that may be difficult when we're talking about doing them fairly close together. It would be easy if everyone could, do it in groups, so to hit everything, but per law, it can only be two board members together at a time.
Got it.
Are you saying that they could go to a high school and two of them be in the cafeteria and two of them be in the gym?
No.
I
let's
would
not do it
prefer
that way.
I'm saying, let's think it out.
Yeah, let's try that one.
Yeah,
I would
I don't think
prefer-
that works well.
I would,
Okay.
I would be much more comfortable if it's totally separate days, separate
And we all have different
locations.
zones, that it wouldn't make sense to have four of us in the same high school, cause you wouldn't have.
You wanna get your own people.
Yeah, you wouldn't
Right.
get your own
People in
constituents.
And you don't have to use it, as long as the school is available and principal's okay with it, I can't imagine any of them would not be, using the, libraries maybe, or cafeterias or whatever, but also you could use public library. I mean, there are other venues if schools are not available.
Parks and Rec has some good options.
I think it would be great
That's a
to,
welcome center, I mean, there are options,
it would be
so.
great to kinda use you to kinda help facilitate those. I
Absolutely.
think that would be good. That way, at least we know.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
so,
I will just say, what I've learned from a lot of these is there's a sweet spot. You can't do things too quickly, but you do not want to drag them out. And so schedules are hard. And so I think that's fantastic, using, one person to help centralize that, but don't let it fester on your schedules for 2 months, getting that feedback. Do those town halls in a couple-week period.
we'll work together on the schedules and try to come up with something that's good for the board members and the public.
Ms. Haynes, I have a question for you. So we are, and I think I've talked to all the board members individually, we are getting nothing as far as feedback. How do we get the word out that this is what we're doing? What would be the best, and when we talk about having town halls, is there any other way that we can do to elicit feedback? Because my fear is, the only way I think this is a failure is if we make a decision and then we get all of our feedback. That's what I really am trying to avoid. So how do we get it to where we can get our constituency to engage with us?
Do you want us to advertise? Please reach out to your board member. We can do that, we can put that,
After September 10th.
Yeah.
yeah.
I completely agree with you there, but my fear is that we're gonna see all this, we're gonna make a decision, and then I'm gonna get bombarded with, why did you do it this way?
Newsletter.
Refer it back to, I think we could send communication to all parents to say, look at this website, look at this proposal. Here are the contacts for your board.
Are we allowed to do blast like you all do for first day of school or whatever, to where we do the whole phone call, email, text message all at the same time?
Yeah.
But also schools are coming back obviously tomorrow, so I mean, you can utilize your PTAs. Not to put it on you back there, but the county PTA meets quarterly, so it's something that it'll be after the September 10th meeting if they'll have you. Only 2 of you at a time. To come and explain to the county PTA why it's important that they give their feedback to you. A lot of the times you don't feel like your voice matters, so I mean, if you go and tell them, hey, we want to hear from you, this is important and we want your feedback, maybe they'll, but yeah, we can utilize all of our systems.
Kristen, do we know if we
Yes,
got any
sir.
feedback from the original letter we sent out?
I have not received any, but also
Not really.
I can send out media releases too, and once you guys get dates, and sometimes they advertise it as well, so.
And we could advertise on their social media sites, on their website. We don't have to put it only on the redistricting page. We can put it on the home page of our website, So it is on the home.
I will say one low touch thing that does help get some folks that don't always engage is just doing a simple survey as well. I've seen that work in other places, and you get a variety of responses to them, and it's not huge engagement, but it is another way to get community engagement for folks who might have 5 minutes but don't have an hour.
That's fair.
Sounds good. All right, we'll reconnect on that. Thank you so much for all the hard work so far. We appreciate it. It's going good, so we'll have you back, so that's good. Hope that's not a real gavel. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Ms. Burks, have a second? Second by Dr. Huber. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.